We are delighted to welcome each and every one of you to this most important book launching that we are having today. It is the book launching of the German translation of Jose Rizal's Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. And we are pleased to have with us the publishers, two distinguished historians from the Philippines, and a descendant of Jose Rizal himself. So without further ado, I'd like to give the microphone to one of our country's national treasures, I would say. He radicalized our, at least in my generation, our reading, our appreciation of Jose Rizal by writing things that we would normally not encounter in our textbooks. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to give the microphone now to Dr. Ambeth Ocampo.
We have our, I'm sorry, they did not prepare our slides earlier, but I have a short presentation so that I want to put the panel into context to talk about what Rizal is and how important it is to go back to the primary source. I mean, translation is one of them, but we have to do this.
Am I sitting in the way now?
No, I think they can see it.
Okay.
I wanted to talk about why Rizal is the mascot for the Philippine participation in Frankfurt. One, you have to know that unlike other national heroes of other countries that are liberators and revolutionaries, our national hero is different because our hero is a poet and a novelist. This is what Rizal looked like when he was traveling in Germany, just to give you an idea of how young he was. You must remember Rizal was 26 when he published the Noli Me Tangere, very young age in a country that is young. And many people forget that most of the heroes of the 19th century did their best thing before they were 40 years old. Rizal was also a man who was interested in the world, and not just interested academically, but being able to immerse and understand different cultures. So he fits very well into the Frankfurt Book Fair. I'm showing you here letters that he wrote. This is one letter he wrote when he was in exile in the Pitan, when he knew that the police were opening his mail. So he had to write in different languages. So as you can see here, he starts in German, and then he moves into English, and then he moves to French, and then goes to Spanish, and concludes in Italian. He was always telling his friends abroad, please write to me in your languages because I'm scared to forget all the languages I learned in these different countries. So when you look at it, Rizal was not just a reader, he was an author, and he was also a publisher. So what you see here is he read Hans Christian Andersen in German, and from this German text, he actually made a translation of 5 of Andersen's tales, and he wrote them for his nephews and nieces. And when you look at it, you will actually see here he made little drawings, and it's wonderful. He translated it into Tagalog. I'd like to think that he did this when he was writing the Noli Me Tangere. So the Noli is actually for adults, and then the Andersen tales, which have themes that are reflected in the Noli, are for the children. So he was teaching both young and old. So he also translated things, and he translated Schiller's Wilhelm Tell into Tagalog. And he was not just interested in other language, he was scared of losing his own. So in the last page of his translation of Schiller, he actually even goes back and talks about the pre-colonial Philippine language. So today I want to talk a bit about the novels of Rizal so that we have some background. I don't have much time. Usually takes me 1 semester to do this, but we will do this. The first thing you have to remember is that Rizal is national hero of the Philippines. That's why they shot him. And the problem there is that Rizal is a national hero who wrote a lot for a nation that does not read him. Not only do you have the 2 novels, he left us with 25 volumes of writing, and nobody really reads it. But that's not the other problem. The other problem is that Rizal is read today in translation. Our people, the Filipinos, the young Filipinos, are separated from their past because of language, and they do not know, cannot read Rizal in the original Spanish anymore. And we do have the translations today. So these are the different English translations. They're translations into all major languages, and today we are launching translations into German. And many people don't even read the text. They watch a movie, or this was a telenovela that was based on the novel but not really about the novel. So people learn about Rizal and his novels secondhand. So the covers of the novels have been published. You will see them in the Rizal booth there. The Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. And the Noli Me Tangere actually has an original drawing by Rizal, but the Fili does not have one. It is blank. So many people think that it's actually something that the Historical Commission has created fake news, but you can't have a book without a cover, so they invented one for it. But today we will go beyond the obvious, and I want to show you parts of the manuscript. So we know that Rizal finished the Noli on February 21, 1887 at 11:30 in the evening, Monday. This is the exact time that he put the last dot on the novel. And when you look at this, I've been doing the Rizal for 40 years now, looking at the manuscripts. And in the 1980s, when I was looking at the Noli Me Tangere manuscripts, I saw that there were names on the margins. So there was Lendhart, and there was what I think is Budberg. And I wondered what these people were. And they're different names: Albrecht, Budberg, Lendhart, and Schultz. And when you look at it, their names are all there: Budberg, Lendhart, Albrecht, Schultz. These were the German typesetters who put Rizal's novel into its printed form. So my question has always been, and I've been trying to trace them but cannot find them, who are these 4 German lady typesetters who were the first to read the Noli Me Tangere, but they didn't understand it because it was in Spanish, nor did they know how important this novel would be. So I want to talk about not just what is there, but also comparing the manuscripts with the printed text. Our problem is that a few years ago, the Germans went to Manila and they conserved the original manuscript of the Noli Me Tangere. Nobody thought of doing a high-resolution scan when the Noli was taken out. So now that they sewed it back, it's sewed so tightly you cannot read in between. But let's look at the text. This is the El Filibusterismo, the second novel, and you will see here that Rizal wrote text in Spanish, and then he forgot, and he corrected it, so he wrote a text in German, cut it out, and pasted it. So this is what cut and paste really is. It is not what we do anymore with our word programs. And when you see very clearly here, in the back, there is a Spanish text, which eventually he used as on the cover of the book. So he wrote the German text. Why did he change his mind? We do not know yet. So all throughout the novel, you will see that there are many things that were deleted, texts that were removed in ink, which are gone to us. But we all know that in the Noli Me Tangere, he deleted one entire chapter. That chapter, I hope, is in this new edition. This one he didn't erase. He just put a line on the side of the thing, and the title of the missing chapter is called Elias and Salome. Now, when Rizal was writing the second novel, he said, the El Filibusterismo will be twice the length of the Noli. And when you look at any physical book, you will see that the Fili is much shorter. And why is it shorter? Because Rizal ran out of money. So he drastically had to remove. So he covered whole pages in text, which when you scan, you will, well, people thought was lost to history. 30% of the manuscript is gone. But because I am who I am, I asked for a strong light and then I put it underneath. And I've been able to copy out everything that has been erased. So I always threaten my students that, don't complain about the Philly today because your children, when they take the same course, will read a book that is 30% more because your teacher has put back these things. So the thing here is all these things are now legible. I haven't really had the time to really look it up, but hopefully when I really retire, this is the thing that you need a lot of time to do so. So much remains, despite our many, many translations, there is a lot that is locked up and should be remembered in the manuscripts. Also, we only translate the Noli and the Fili, the novels, but Rizal actually published 3 books. The second book is a book of history, and it is interesting because when you look at it, Rizal talked about the past in the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. He talked about his present when he wrote the Noli, and then the future is in El Filibusterismo. When you look at the novels, they're also interesting because he described the Noli as a novela Tagala. Oops, sorry, can you bring it back? It's a novela Tagala, and the other is a novela Filipina. You wonder why this thing happened. And I'd like to think it's not just something. It is important to see that Rizal was imagining the nation even before it became to be. So when he's talking in the Noli 1887 about a Tagalog novel, you can see that by 1891, he was talking about a Filipino novel. He was going beyond his ethno-linguistic group and thinking about nation, even before it was there. So aside from that, Rizal's novels imagine what it is to be Filipino. And I'd like to think his novels tell us what the Filipino can be. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Ocampo. That's our first reading for today. We go to the second reading by another scholar from the Philippines, Dr. June Aguilar, who will deliver a paper, Jose Rizal, Nationhood, and the Anti-Colonial Imagination.
That was yesterday.
Oh, that was yesterday. This is in my script. So maybe another paper from Dr. Aguilar. June.
Thank you. I wrote the afterword in the German edition of the Noli Me Tangere, and so I shall give a synopsis of what I wrote there, which they translated in German and which I can no longer read. As we all know, Noli Me Tangere was written by Rizal here in Europe, and the final chapters were completed just nearby in Wilhelmsfeld. Yes. And it was written in the Spanish language and printed by a small press in Berlin. The book appeared in print sometime in March 1887 with about 2,000 copies paid for by the author using borrowed funds. By late December 1887, the book was already banned in the Philippines. And so copies of the novel were smuggled into Manila and circulated clandestinely. Given the language barrier and the very limited copies of the novel, only a few people actually read the novel. But it was much talked about, as it was a bold attempt by a native that had never done before, a bold attempt to portray colonial conditions and how it affected the lives of the colonized. Native readers found its literary form so new and powerful that it ignited political passions. Its publication, like as Ben Anderson would say, was like the detonation of a bomb, or perhaps the launching of a cruise missile. One interesting fact about this novel is that Rizal did not use a pseudonym and therefore did not conceal his identity as the author. as was the common practice at that time among the Ilustrados. As a result of Rizal's boldness in identifying himself as author, he and his kin in the Philippines were targeted by the colonial state. It was also widely rumored that Rizal was a German spy. It was also known popularly as Dr. Uliman, Dr. Aleman, German doctor. He was known as an agent of Bismarck. But what Rizal did emboldened the other Ilustrados, the young natives who were in Europe, and they began to do away with their pen names and began to append their real names in the articles that they published in La Solidaridad, the periodical published by these young people, first in Barcelona and then in Madrid. To whom did Rizal address the novel? Rizal said that he wrote for his countrymen, but in the novel's first chapter, we read that it is addressed to, quote, friends and foes. In other words, he expected elements of the Spanish regime to read his novel and be pricked by it. At the same time, he expected friends to read his work, and that group included Spaniards and other Europeans who in principle were sympathetic to the nationalist cause, but were largely unaware about the Philippines. These friends included German ethnologists and linguists to whom Rizal had been introduced by his Austrian friend Ferdinand Blumentritt. As though to establish his credentials as a knowledgeable insider, Rizal made the narrator speak a heavy dose of Tagalog, a trait that I hope is retained in this German translation. In other words, I do hope to see the Tagalog words in this German version. Rizal used them intentionally. Rizal, as we've heard from Ambeth, Rizal called this work a novela Tagala, and as such, it paid little attention to the rest of the Spanish Philippines. The story is set in the fictional Tagalog town of San Diego, which is under the control of powerful Spanish friars. The local Spanish colonial militia and the native officials were essentially under the thumb of the friars. But San Diego is also a place that bears the imprint of a line of Spaniards descended from a Basque immigrant who personified both rebelliousness against Madrid and arrogance towards the natives. The main character, the Creole Juan Crisostomo Ibarra y Magsalin, whose mother was a native, represented the fourth generation whose sentiments had become inseparable from his land of birth, Las Islas Filipinas. Indeed, the Creole was the original Filipino, technically defined as a Spaniard born outside Europe and culturally deemed inferior to the peninsular, those born in Spain. However, the Creoles in the Philippines had come to develop patriotic sentiments. In the novel, the radical change started with Ibarra's father, Don Rafael, whose sympathy for the natives led him to suffer injustice at the hands of Spanish power holders. Ibarra himself starts off idealistic, hoping to improve San Diego by establishing a school. However, his romantic relationship with Maria Clara brings him and his reformism in conflict with the friars and the colonial state, eventuating in disillusionment and personal tragedy until Ibarra is transformed into Simon in El Filibusterismo. That Ibarra is Creole resonates with the revolutionary spirit of the times. In the wake of the revolutions in Spanish America, Creoles in the Philippines also sought separation from Spain. But the military adventurism of Creoles in the 1820s ended in defeat. Creole patriotism resurfaced in the 1850s in the form of a campaign for diocesan priests to serve as parish priests and exercise their right to administer those parishes, known in Philippine history as the secularization controversy. The diocesan priests were composed primarily of native clergy, but Creoles like Pedro Pelaez and Jose Burgos were at the head of the movement that struggled against the peninsular Spanish friars. The political activism of Creoles was crushed during the brutal suppression of the Cavite Revolt in 1872. Seen in this light, it was not odd that the main character of Rizal's novel was a Creole. In fact, the Creole could not be understood apart from the Indio or native. As the story progresses, the reader realizes the complex intertwining of Ibarra's life with Elias, the Indio hero and Ibarra's interlocutor. This complicated interweaving of lives was created by a historical injustice in the past, but carried to the present in acts of life-saving reciprocity and mutual indebtedness. The revelation of this past provides Elias the option to exact retribution. But instead of exacting vengeance, Elias delivers the lesson of forgiveness and self-sacrifice as central to nationhood. But it is Maria Clara who in many ways moves the plot forward. All the major characters, protagonists and antagonists, are linked to Maria Clara. At the outset, she appears passive, the victim of authority figures. But she displays subtle acts of resistance. And in the end, no authority figure could break her resoluteness. In the Noli, readers of the Philippines in the late 19th century could empathize with the characters and understand their misfortunes as caused by Spanish friars and the colonial regime. Readers could comprehend the tragedies that befell the characters in terms of their own experiences of injustice and oppression at the hands of the colonizer. The novel, therefore, was strategic in stimulating the imagining of a community in the minds of the readers and in the minds of those who talk about the novel, and a very specific type of a community of suffering victims of the Spanish regime. The novel made them realize their shared predicament, gesturing toward the possibility of their liberation, not as individuals, but as a collectivity. In dedicating the novel A Mi Patria, to my homeland, Rizal declared that in seeking a cure for the, quote, cancer that afflicted the patria, he was lifting the shroud that concealed her illness in the hope of finding a cure. There was no sure remedy, but the novel was a first step in opening up and, quote, sacrificing everything to the truth. This opening up included the defects and failings of the natives, not just of the colonizer. In pursuit of truth, Rizal engaged in self-mockery, although he attributed all the societal faults to the Spanish. Our context in the 21st century is radically different from that when this literary work first appeared in the 1880s. Nevertheless, the reader, now with this translation, including the contemporary German reader, can reimagine the struggles that led a novel to birth a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aguilar. The newly released book of Dr. Aguilar, Jose Rizal, is published by Ateneo de Manila University, and you can take a look at this Rizaliano material at the node dedicated to our national hero. Dr. Ocampo's book, Cabinet of Curiosities, is now available in German. So at this point, I'd like to call on the two publishers of Jose Rizal's translation to German. We'd like to listen to their journeys. May I give the microphone to Sabine Erbrick of Surkamp Verlag and Roman Pliski of Morio Verlag. Please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I think we're both very happy to be here and to be able to present the books. And thank you for these wonderful introductions. I learned a lot about the book that we've published. Much information that I didn't have so far, and I'm amazed. You just recently mentioned the contemporary readers, so I think what we might point out, of course we are not Rizal scholars, but we can point out a little bit more about why we chose the books and how we think they resonate with contemporary readers. So maybe start with how we came upon Noli, and then we move to Philly. So usually when there's a guest of honor in Frankfurt, we as a publisher try to publish at least one book of the invited country, possibly more. And I was very surprised when I came upon the fact that we actually had published Noli, which I learned is like the most important book for the Philippines, and the author is a national hero, and the book is read in the school. So we had published that book in 1987, so 100 years, well, but almost. I mean, the Insel Publishing House is very old, so it could have happened. So it was 100 years after its first publication in Berlin. What we just heard. So Rizal published the book amazingly in Germany's capital. So we published the book in 1987, and I was wondering how did that happen back then? And I found the information that actually it was the German ambassador to the Philippines who back then had the initiative to publish the book. He knew obviously about the importance, and then he activated some German investors and companies who were based in Manila to finance the translation. And somehow there was the correspondence between our publisher and the ambassador, and then the German edition of Noli was published in 1987. And then when I started reading, I thought, well, let's see, a book published in 1887, let's see if it would be a good choice for the guest of honor. And I started reading, and it just takes like 2 sentences and you're mesmerized by this book. You're mesmerized by the contemporary voice in a way. I mean, the freshness, the eruditeness, the humanism, but also the way he connects with his characters. And so in a way, I was absolutely flabbergasted by the originality of this book. And when I read the first afterword that we had published back then, written by an editor, when I found out about the history of the book and what happened to Rizal afterwards when he came back to the Philippines, I was even more astonished. And then I thought, that is quite a treasure that we my colleagues back then had published, and I was very happy that we could offer this book for the book fair. But I was even more astonished when I heard your story, how you came across the Philly, or actually about José Rizal. So maybe you want to add your story.
Yes, it's a little bit difficult. In the late 1980s, I finished high school, and I lived near Heidelberg, where I studied after that. I lived in Wilhelmsfeld, near the church, and there was a small park, there was a sculpture of a man. Yeah, sometimes I saw it, and I didn't recognize what kind of man, what kind of hero I was living near. And he was living there 100 years ago. He finished the Noli in Wilhelmsfeld. He was invited from a family, and he was in Heidelberg. He studied there medicine, and I read all the things some years ago. But I was really excited because in 2015 I got the offer of a translation from a friend. His father translated Il Filibusterismo, and it was like a life project for him. And it was the first time I heard from the author, and I could read the book, and it was fantastic. It was rich. It was an enormous book for me, and we should do this. I had a publishing house in Heidelberg, and that fits perfect. So in 2016, we published the book. It was really successful, and so we had the book also, but a little bit later, and I was really happy to make a second edition this year, and we worked through the whole translation, and we recognized that the translator, he was like in the last years, he translated, for example, one page of the book. He didn't translate it, so we have the first complete translation of Filibusterismo. And I was very, very happy to put the second book on the shelf of the Philippine literature. Thanks a lot.
I just wanted to add one final comment because when I mentioned that, Rizal has a huge love for his characters. He describes them in great detail, and with all their spleens and all their quirks and all their problems, and but also with a great love for them. You mentioned the importance of Maria Clara, and I must say I was very, very impressed by the way female characters are depicted in this novel, written in 1887. As a contemporary reader, I was amazed by their agency, about their, usually like when you read novels, European novels of that time, women are very, very passive characters. If there even are female characters in the novels. So I was really mesmerized by the fact that the female characters had this kind of agency, and Maria Clara is a fantastic character in world literature, I must say.
Thank you, Sabine and Roman. A round of applause for our two publishers. The German translations are available outside. I hope our German guest will procure copies of the book. At this point, we shall listen to a reading by an actor and an author himself, an excerpt from Noli Me Tangere. Ladies and gentlemen, Rodolph von Waldenfels.
Okay. Ich lese auf Deutsch. Ihr habt alle jetzt Englisch gesprochen. Es ist fast ein bisschen seltsam, jetzt ins Deutsche zurückzufallen. Erstmal einen schönen Nachmittag wünsche ich Ihnen allen. Ich habe 2 Stellen ausgesucht, die man verstehen kann, auch ohne, dass man die Bücher gelesen hat. Und das sind 2 Stellen, wo sie die sprachliche Kraft, ich habe immer das Gefühl, als wäre das Mikrofon nicht ganz richtig eingestellt. Habt ihr das da hinten im Griff? Habt ihr alles im Griff? Okay, super. Ich habe 2 Stellen ausgesucht, die man verstehen kann, ohne dass man die Bücher gelesen hat und sogar ohne, dass man weiß, wovon die Bücher handeln. Und gleichzeitig sind es aber Stellen, die sprachliche Kraft zeigen und die uns die Welt, aus der heraus diese Bücher geschrieben worden sind, sehr nahe bringt. Finde ich jedenfalls. Und es sind 2 spannende Stellen. Ich finde es ja auch wichtig, dass es unterhaltsam ist, oder? Absolut. Ich lese jeweils 5 Minuten. Erst aus Noli Me Tangere, also zeitlich die richtige Abfolge, das ist das erste Buch, das erschienen ist. Und dann aus Die Rebellion, heißt es auf Deutsch, aus dem 2. Buch. Und dieses Kapitel heißt Die Geschichte einer Mutter. Sisa rannte nach Hause, völlig verstört und von jener Panik ergriffen, die uns überkommt, wenn wir uns mitten im Unglück von allen im Stich gelassen sehen und jede Hoffnung uns verlässt. Es ist, als verdunkle sich alles um uns her. Und wenn wir irgendwo in der Ferne ein noch so winziges Licht blinken sehen, eilen wir darauf zu, unbeirrt, mag sich auch mitten im Weg ein Abgrund auftun. Die Mutter wollte ihre Söhne retten, aber auf welche Weise? Mütter fragen nicht nach Mitteln, wenn es um ihre Kinder geht. Sie rannte ohne Besinnen, von Angst und düsteren Vorahnungen getrieben. Würden sie Basilio schon verhaftet haben? Wohin hatte sich Crispin geflüchtet? Das sind die beiden Söhne. Als sie zu ihrer Behausung zurückkam, konnte sie über den Gartenzaun hinweg 2 Soldatenmützen erkennen. Unmöglich zu beschreiben, was in ihr vorging. Denken konnte sie nicht mehr. Sie wusste sehr wohl, wie verwegen diese Männer waren, die auch mit den Reichsten im Ort nicht viel Federlesens machten. Was würde jetzt ihr und ihren Söhnen geschehen, die des Diebstahls bezichtigt wurden? Soldaten sind keine Menschen. Sie haben kein Ohr für flehendes Bitten und sind an den Anblick von Tränen gewöhnt. Instinktiv erhob Sisa die Augen zum Himmel und der Himmel strahlte in heiterstem Glanz und kleine weiße Wolken segelten durch das Blau. Sie blieb stehen, um das Zittern zu bezwingen, das ihren ganzen Körper schüttelte. Die Soldaten kamen aus ihrem Haus und zwar allein. Außer der Henne hatten sie nichts mitgenommen. Wie gut sie sind und was für ein gutes Herz sie haben, flüsterte Sisa und weinte fast vor Freude. Sie atmete tief und fasste wieder Mut. Hätten die Soldaten das Haus niedergebrannt, ihre Söhne jedoch in Freiheit gelassen, sie würde sie noch mit Segenssprüchen überhäufen. Dankbar sah sie abermals zum Himmel empor. Ein Schwarm weißer Reiher, diese zarten Wölkchen des philippinischen Himmels, zog darüber hin. In ihrem Herzen erwachte wieder das Vertrauen und sie ging weiter. Als sie sich diesen schrecklichen Männern näherte, blickte sie wie zerstreut umher und tat, als sähe sie ihre hilflos piepsende Henne gar nicht. Kaum aber war sie an ihnen vorbei, wäre sie am liebsten gelaufen, hielt aber wohlweislich an sich. Sie war noch nicht weit gekommen, als ein herrischer Ruf an ihr Ohr drang. Sie fuhr zusammen, stellte sich aber taub und ging weiter. Sie riefen sie nochmals an, aber diesmal schrien sie und brüllten ein Schimpfwort. Wider Willen wandte sie sich blass um und zitterte. Einer der Soldaten winkte sie heran. Mechanisch ging Sisa auf die Soldaten zu. Sie spürte, wie ihr der Schrecken die Zunge lähmte und die Kehle austrocknete. Raus mit der Wahrheit, sonst binden wir dich an diesen Baum und jagen dir 2 Kugeln in den Kopf, sagte der eine drohend. Die Frau blickte nach dem Baum. Bist du die Mutter von dem Diebsgesindel da? Fragte der andere. Mutter von dem Diebsgesindel? Wiederholte Sisa wie ein Automat. Wo ist das Geld, das deine Söhne gestern Abend gebracht hat? Das Geld? Streite das ja nicht ab, sonst geht's dir umso schlimmer, fügte der andere hinzu. Wir sind gekommen, um deine Söhne zu holen und der Große ist uns entwischt. Wo hast du den Kleinen versteckt? Als Sisa dies hörte, atmete sie auf. Senor, erwiderte sie, seit vielen Tagen habe ich meinen Sohn Crispin nicht gesehen. Ich hoffte, ihn heute Morgen im Kloster zu sehen, aber dort sagten sie mir, dass... Die Soldaten wechselten einen vielsagenden Blick. Also gut, rief der eine, gib uns das Geld und wir lassen dich in Ruhe. Senor, sagte die unglückliche Frau bittend, meine Söhne stehlen nicht, auch nicht aus Hunger. Wir sind daran gewöhnt, Hunger zu leiden. Basilio hat mir keinen einzigen Quarto gebracht. Durchsucht das ganze Haus. Und wenn ihr nur einen Real findet, dann macht mit uns, was ihr wollt. Wir armen Leute sind doch nicht alle Diebe. Ja, dann, versetzte der Soldat gedehnt und sah Sisa mit stierem Blick in die Augen. Ja, dann kommst du mit uns. Deine Söhne werden dann schon auftauchen und das gestohlene Geld rausrücken. Du gehst mit. Ich? Mitgehen? Flüsterte die Frau und wich mit einem entsetzten Blick auf die Uniform zurück. Und warum nicht? Ach, habt Mitleid mit mir, bat sie auf den Knien. Ich bin eine arme Frau, ich habe euch weder Geld noch Schmuck anzubieten. Das Einzige, was ich hatte, habt ihr ja schon genommen, die Henne, die ich verkaufen wollte. Nehmt alles mit, was ihr in meiner Hütte findet, aber lasst mich in Frieden hier, lasst mich hier in Frieden sterben. Vorwärts, du kommst mit und wenn du nicht freiwillig gehst, binden wir dich. Sisa brach in bitteres Weinen aus. Diese Männer waren unbeugsam. »Lass mich wenigstens ein Stück vorangehen«, flehte sie, als sie brutal gepackt und vorwärts gestoßen wurde. Die beiden Männer hatten ein Einsehen und beratschlagten im Flüsterton. »Also gut«, meinte der eine. »Von hier bis zum Dorf kannst du uns weglaufen, da bleibst du also schön zwischen uns beiden. Wenn wir einmal dort sind, dann kannst du 20 Schritte vor uns gehen. Aber nimm dich in Acht. Du trittst in keinen Laden ein und du hältst dich nirgendwo auf. Vorwärts und etwas plötzlich jetzt.« Da halfen keine Bitten und keine Einwände und keine Versprechungen. Die Soldaten sagten, sie riskierten bereits genug und erlaubten ihr schon viel zu viel. Als sie sich von den beiden in die Mitte genommen sah, meinte sie vor Scham zu vergehen. Zwar kam niemand des Weges, aber sind die Luft und das Tageslicht niemand? Die wirkliche Scham sieht überall Blicke. Sisa bedeckte sich das Gesicht mit dem Tuch und während sie blindlings dahin tappte, weinte sie leise über ihre Erniedrigung. Sie wusste um ihr Elend. Sie wusste, dass sie von allen verlassen war, sogar vom eigenen Mann. Und bisher hatte sie sich für eine ehrbare Frau gehalten, die geachtet wurde. Bisher hatte sie mitleidig auf jene Frauen in ihren anstößigen Kleidern gesehen, die von den Soldaten als Soldatenliebchen bezeichnet wurden. Nun erschien es ihr, als wäre sie selbst noch eine Stufe tiefer auf der Lebensleiter gesunken.
Thank you, Rudolf.
Und jetzt lese ich Ihnen einen Abschnitt aus Die Rebellion. Und die Person, um die es da geht, das ist die Hauptperson, Simun. Vielleicht wird nachher noch etwas über das Buch gesprochen werden und dann wird nochmal deutlicher gemacht, wer Simun ist und worin der Unterschied zwischen den beiden Büchern besteht und welche Entwicklung zwischen diesen beiden Büchern stattgefunden hat, die sehr interessant ist. Aus einem Zimmer seines Hauses, das zum Fluss hinausging, blickte Simun auf die ummauerte Stadt, deren Umrisse sich durch die geöffneten Fenster abzeichneten. Die verzinkten Blechdächer glänzten im Mondlicht, die Türme ragten traurig, schwer und melancholisch in die ruhige Stimmung der Nacht. Simun hatte seine dunkle Brille abgenommen, sein weißes Haar rahmte wie silbernes Laub sein sonnengebräuntes, entschlossenes Gesicht, das nur schwach vom Licht einer Lampe erhellt wurde, deren Flamme flackerten, da das Petroleum zur Neige ging. Simun, ganz in Gedanken versunken, merkte nicht, dass die Lampe erlosch und es dunkel wurde. In wenigen Tagen, murmelte er vor sich hin, in wenigen Tagen, wenn diese verfluchte Stadt, diese Brutstätte anmaßender Nichtswürdigkeit und schamloser Ausbeutung der Unwissenden und Unglücklichen, wenn die von allen 4 Seiten in Flammen steht, wenn erst der Aufruhr in den Vororten losbricht und meine rächerischen Horden, geboren aus Habgier und Unrecht, durch die entsetzten Straßen jagen, dann werde ich die Mauern deines Gefängnisses sprengen, dich aus den Fängen des Fanatismus befreien und du wirst dich wie ein Phönix aus der glühenden Asche erheben. Eine Rebellion von Männern in der Finsternis geplant, riss mich von dir los und eine andere Rebellion wird mich in deine Arme tragen und mir neues Leben schenken. Und dieser Mond wird, noch ehe er voll ist, die Philippinen gereinigt von allem abscheulichen Unrat in helles Licht tauchen. Simun verstummte plötzlich. Eine innere Stimme fragte ihn, ob er, Simun, nicht selbst auch zum Unrat dieser verfluchten Stadt gehörte, ob er nicht sogar das giftigste Ferment in ihr sei. Und den Toten gleich, die sich aus ihren Gräbern erheben, wenn die letzte Posaune erklingt, erhoben sich gleichsam als Echo auf diese geheimnisvolle Frage 1000 blutige Gespenster, verzweifelte Schatten erschlagener Männer, entehrter Frauen, ihren Familien entrissener Väter, angestachelter und geförderter Laster, verhöhnter Tugenden. Zum ersten Mal in seinem kriminellen Leben, seit er in Havanna durch Laster und Bestechung ein Werkzeug geschaffen hat, um seine Pläne durchzusetzen. Ein erstes Mal rebellierte etwas in ihm und wehrte sich gegen sein Tun. Simon schloss die Augen und verharrte eine Weile reglos. Dann hielt er seine Hand vor die Stirn. Er wollte nicht auf die Stimme seines Gewissens hören. Ihm wurde Angst und Bange. Er war auf keinen Fall bereit, in sich zu forschen. Ihm fehlte der Mut, auf sein bisheriges Leben zurückzublicken. Wie? Sollte er nun, da der Augenblick zu handeln gekommen war, den Mut sinken lassen? Sollte gerade jetzt seine Überzeugung, sein Glaube an sich selbst zu wanken beginnen? Aber die Geister der Unglücklichen, in deren Schicksal er eingegriffen hatte, schwebten weiter vor seinen Augen, als kämen sie aus der glitzernden Wasseroberfläche des Flusses und als drängten sie in sein Zimmer vor, als schrien sie ihn an und als streckten sie ihre Arme zu ihm hin, während Vorwürfe und Klagen die Luft mit Drohungen und Rufen nach Rache erfüllten. Er trat vom Fenster zurück und vielleicht zitterte er jetzt zum ersten Mal in seinem Leben, und zwar vor Angst. Nein, ich bin wahrscheinlich krank. Mir geht es einfach nicht gut, murmelte er. Viele hassen mich. Viele machen mich für ihr Elend verantwortlich, aber... Er stand auf und ging wieder ans Fenster, um seine heiße Stirn in der frischen Abendluft zu kühlen. Unter ihm zog der silbern glänzende Fluss dahin, auf dessen Oberfläche träge fließender Schaum funkelte, der kreisend, immer aufs Neue vorwärts und rückwärts strömend, dem Lauf winziger Strudel folgte. Auf der anderen Uferseite erhob sich die Stadt. Der Anblick ihrer dunklen Mauern hatte etwas Unheilvolles, etwas Geheimnisvolles. Aber im Mondlicht, das alles edler und schöner erscheinen lässt, verloren sie ihr schäbiges Aussehen. Simon zitterte wieder. Es war, als sähe er das strenge Antlitz seines Vaters vor sich, der im Gefängnis gestorben war, aber für eine gute Sache gestorben war. Und das noch viel strengere Gesicht eines anderen Mannes, eines Mannes, der sein Leben für ihn, Simon, geopfert hatte, weil er glaubte, dieser würde durch die Erneuerung seines Landes dadurch herbeiführen. Nein, ich kann jetzt nicht zurückweichen, rief er aus und wischte sich den Schweiß von der Stirn. Die Sache ist zu weit gediehen. Der Erfolg wird mir Recht geben. Weg mit allen Wunschbildern und trügerischen Theorien, Feuer und Stahl gegen diesen Krebs, Strafe dem Verbrechen. Und wenn die Mittel nicht taugen, zum Teufel mit ihnen. Nein, ich habe alles genau bedacht. Das ist jetzt nur das Fieber. Ich verliere meinen klaren Kopf. Das ist ganz natürlich. Wenn ich das Böse tat, dann nur, um Gutes zu bewirken, und der Zweck heiligt die Mittel. Nur eins darf ich nicht tun, mich selber der Gefahr aussetzen. Mit wirren Gedanken legte er sich nieder und versuchte zu schlafen.
Danke, Rodolph. Maraming salamat po. At this point, I'd like to call on the publishers, Sabine and Roman, to hand over the copies to our distinguished Filipino historians, Ambeth and June, and to one of Rizal's descendant, Miss Noelle Sy-Quia, and of course, to our ambassador to Germany, Madame Irene Susan Natividad. Ma'am, please come on stage. I'd like also to call on my co-head for the translation committee, Miss Nene Santa Romana Cruz, to help us in this handover ceremony.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Ambeth, please.
I have two. Yes, I have another one. Yeah, I will have it quickly.
To Dr. Aguilar, who wrote the afterword for this updated German translation. To Miss Sy-Quia. And of course, to our ambassador, Ma'am Susan Natividad. Ma'am, picture.